thank you. Really good to be with so many people this early on a Monday morning. I'm kind of surprised. Is this just where you all hang out on Monday mornings?
At the schoolhouse.
Yeah, we don't have anything else.
To George for hosting us, Bill for helping to organize, Drew for ensuring that this was a success, each one of you for taking a little bit of time out of your lives, especially those of you brave enough to bring your little ones on this summer morning, because it's just a great reminder that this is what this campaign is all about. Every one of us, our commitment to public service, to our country at this defining moment of truth. We do it not so much for ourselves and those of our generation, but for our kids and grandkids and every generation that will follow. And if ever there were a moment to stand up and to be counted, it is this one. And that's why I'm so grateful to be in this room with you. And I thought before I had a chance to answer your questions and listen to what's on your mind and have the opportunity to learn from you, I would first do something I rarely get to do in the 3 months that I've been on the campaign trail, and that is to introduce to you my wife, Amy O'Rourke. I thought I'd ask her to say a few words.
This is an amazing welcome, particularly on a Monday morning. So thank you very, very much. Like Beto said, this is the second time that I've been able to join him on the campaign trail in this presidential race. My first trip to Iowa, and it has been amazing. Every time he comes home, he tells me about the incredible people he's meeting, how kind everyone is, and so it's great to be here and to see it in person. And then also just driving through this state, it looks nothing like I imagined. It is so incredibly beautiful. And so just want to thank you all for the very, very warm welcome.
Yeah.
Beto and I are going on 14 years of marriage. We met in 2004. I was passing through El Paso. Yes, I love your applause. I was passing through El Paso teaching for a year there, and we were set up on a blind date by my aunt. And so, go on a few great dates. He's introducing me to El Paso, and then at dinner one night he tells me he's going to run for city council. And so, being from a family that was never involved in politics, I sort of wanted to run the other way. But he had me captured. It was going well. And so I was introduced to El Paso. I was getting to know Beto through knocking on doors, going to neighborhood meetings. And not only did I fall in love with Beto, but I really fell in love with the El Paso community and this incredible bi-national place that is El Paso and Ciudad Juarez. So, city council for 6 years. We had 3 babies, Ulysses, who's now 12, Molly, who's 10, and Henry, who's 8. My mom, his mom, friends are all taking care of them this weekend. And then decided to run for the U.S. Congress. And in very much the same way that we ran for city council, we knocked on as many doors as we possibly could. And really through listening to people in that process, began to understand what some of the very serious underlying issues, federal issues there were in our community. 6 years in the U.S. Congress, decided to take the very bold step of running for the U.S. Senate, and tried to take that same approach to the state level. And I will tell you, traveling all across Texas, Beto went to 254 counties. I didn't go to quite as many as that. But being in rooms like this, particularly at the beginning of the campaign when nobody really knew who we were, and showing up in small towns, big towns, blue, red, it didn't matter. We were always greeted with such a warm welcome, very much like we have been here in Iowa. And so this has just been an incredible first step for me in Iowa. I'm really happy to be here in Clinton with you all. And any questions afterwards that you want to ask me, ask Beto, we're here. I'm looking forward to meeting all of you. So thank you.
So I I mentioned at the outset, we're at this defining moment of truth for the country. And what does that mean? Let me explain it to you from my perspective, and let me hear what you have to say about this. So we've been able to make this work, más o menos, for the last 243 years. We started this experiment on the premise that we're not going to define ourselves in this country by our race, or by our ethnicity, or by whom we're related to a common ancestry. Instead, we decided at the outset we're all created equal, to equal opportunity, and to the people of the planet, wherever you came from. In the 19th century, it was your O'Rourke's fleeing famine. They claimed the lives of more than 1 million in Ireland, and they found a home here in the United States. Today, there are families who are making a 2,000-mile journey, the length of Mexico, from the northern triangle of Central America, leaving the deadliest places on the planet, bar none today. In some of those countries, they too are facing historic droughts. What they are planting is not growing. They cannot feed themselves, literally. And they're doing what any human being in that same situation, facing those same conditions, would do. That's certainly what Amy and I would do if it were the only way to save the lives of Ulysses and Molly and Henry. We'd make that same journey and come to this same country. And I would argue, from our perspective in El Paso, perhaps from yours in Clinton, that those differences, that we are composed of the planet from every single corner, and have found a home here, chose the United States, left what we knew in terms of our language, our culture, our history, our family, our country, to start anew as strangers in a strange land, to do better for ourselves and for our kids, for sure, but also because we were called to do better for this country. And we all have, regardless of where we came from. And at this moment, this idea is being undermined, openly questioned, and in fact, in some parts of our country, including the very highest offices in the land, we are turning our backs on this idea. To think about building a 2,000-mile wall, 30 feet high, at a cost of $30 billion, which will require you and me to take our fellow Americans' ranches and farms and homes, because it will not be built on the true international boundary line, which is the center channel of the Rio Grande River. It will be built miles into the interior. And no wall is going to keep out that family who has nowhere else to go at this moment. To describe Muslims as somehow inherently dangerous and so to ban all of their travel, to talk about Klansmen and Nazis and white supremacists as very fine people, we begin to lose what we began 243 years ago. And whether you are concerned about losing it for yourself, think about your kids and your grandkids. And I bet you that's exactly why you are here right now. This great democracy, the exception, not the rule in world history or on the planet here at this moment. We could lose it if we decide that some people, because of the position of power and public trust that they hold, are somehow above the law. That you can invite the involvement, the invasion literally, of a foreign power into our democracy, as one candidate did in 2016. And then when we seek to investigate, to find out just what happened, to learn the facts, understand the truth, and pursue accountability and justice as far as it reaches and as high up as it goes, and you obstruct that investigation, and you prevent us from being able to save this very democracy and to protect the sanctity of the ballot box and our elections, we begin to lose what has set us apart and distinguished us in the world. And I think about the other challenges that we face. I've been hearing at town halls like these all over the state of Iowa and all over the country. Someone shared with me when we were in Knoxville the day before yesterday that Iowa ranks 51st in mental health care access. How many people with schizophrenia and bipolar disorder and clinical depression are unable to afford the care that they need, go without, sometimes to tragic outcomes, or take themselves, when they can think of nothing else to do, to an emergency room, or in some extreme cases, get arrested on purpose to go to the county jail, where they are guaranteed to at least temporarily get the care that they need to make life bearable? How are we going to make sure that teachers and public school educators in classrooms like these get the support that they need so that they can focus on that child before them, unlock her lifelong love of learning, after which there's absolutely no stopping her, and by extension this country. And yet here in this state, starting in 2017, we removed the power from teachers to organize, to be able to bargain for better wages and working conditions, and the ability to devise the instruction that they will deliver to those kids. And you know who benefits from that? Minnesota, seeing a bumper crop of English teachers and social studies teachers and physics teachers, each one of them paid for by the taxpayers and citizens of the state of Iowa. I want that teacher not to have to work 2 or 3 jobs just to make ends meet here in Clinton. I want her to be able to focus on those kids and be able to fulfill her true potential. I want to make sure, as I listen to farmers in every single part of this state, especially those who are already underwater in debt, and now especially in the southwest part of the state, find themselves literally underwater from historic flooding along the banks of the Missouri River, and now taking it on the chin from the Trump administration, imposing tariffs on a country whose markets they worked a lifetime to open, for the corn and the soybeans and the pork that are grown and raised right here in this state that feed not just Iowa, not just the United States of America, but so much of the rest of the world. Those farmers, they are telling me, cannot last much longer, and they do not want bailouts. They simply want to be able to make a profit and to open those markets and to make sure that they can pass that very farm on to their daughters and their sons, so the next generation can ensure that we have the food security and independence that has always allowed us to be such a great country. And that climate change to which those farmers point me, whether they're along the banks of the Missouri or in Davenport along the Mississippi, whose flooding levels last month broke the record set in 1993, or if you know anything about my home state of Texas, Houston, in 2017, 58 inches of rain fell from the sky, which is the landfall record in a single storm for as long as we've been keeping them in all of North America. These floods, these storms, the fires that we saw in California, the droughts that I mentioned in Central America and in the Panhandle and West Texas, they will all pale in comparison to the disasters we will see going forward, again, for our kids and the generations that follow, unless we do everything within our power right now with the limited time left to us. Scientists say that if over the next decade we free ourselves from a dependence on fossil fuels, fully embrace renewable energy, invest in the next generation of renewable energy, and then those farmers I've been listening to, put them in the driver's seat, pay them a profit to plant cover crops, to keep more land in conservation, to use regenerative grazing practices to restore the soil and keep more of that carbon in the ground so it's not released into the air. If every single one of us does every single thing that we can, then this country will be able to meet that challenge. We will set the standard for the world, convene the other powers of the planet, and stop us from cooking another 2 degrees Celsius, after which we never get this planet back, and certainly we will face the condemnation and the judgment of the generations that follow. And looking into Amy's eyes and thinking about our 3 kids, I don't want to face their judgment. Instead, I want them to be proud of the people of 2019 and 2020. At this moment, that our democracy was so badly damaged and this country so highly polarized and divided, we decided we were going to bring every single person in to the solution. No me importa if you're a Republican or a Democrat, live in a big city or a rural community. You are an American first before you are anything else. And we're going to count on one another to make sure that we deliver at this moment of truth and maximum promise. So when it comes to healthcare, and especially mental health care, we're going to make sure that we implement guaranteed, high-quality, universal health care for every child, for every woman, for every man. And for those women, we'll also understand that health care means they make their own decisions about their own body and have access to the care of their own on this economy. Not only do I want to make sure that no teacher, no public school educator is working 2 or 3 jobs to make ends meet, I want to make sure that we have a true minimum living wage, $15 as the floor, so no American is working 2 or 3 jobs to make ends meet. want to make sure that when it comes to immigration, we don't greet those children that I just described who made that 2,000-mile journey with walls or cages or deportations for those moms who risked their very lives to bring them here in the first place. I want to make sure that we follow our asylum laws and rewrite our country's immigration laws. And on this issue of climate, by which we will be judged by the generations that come and by history forever, I want us to be up to this, the greatest, the most urgent challenge, and I want us to do it together. And so I will close with this. What is the single greatest mechanism that would allow us to meet the single greatest challenge we have ever faced? I believe it is this democracy. A government of, by, and for the people. The ability to reveal the genius of hundreds of millions of our fellow Americans and put their potential and their power to use along a common cause. But at this moment, we've got a democracy whose institutions have been captured by those who can pay for influence and access and increasingly outcomes. And we've got tens of millions of our fellow Americans who've been locked out altogether. That's why at the heart of this campaign is a bold set of reforms and repairs to our democracy. First, we bring tens of millions of Americans back in through automatic and same-day voter registration. Young people who feel and express the urgency around climate, around gun violence, around making sure those dreamers are not deported, we pre-register them to vote when they're 16 and 17 years old. So when they're 18, they are ready to go and cast that ballot. Second, we remove any barriers to access to the ballot box. That means a new Voting Rights Act. So based on the color of your skin, or your ethnicity, or your country of national origin, you are not locked out by voter ID laws, or voter suppression, or purges to the voter rolls as we see throughout the country. We're going to make Election Day a national holiday. And then third, and perhaps most important, I want us to be able to restore faith and confidence in our elections. So first and foremost, let's make sure that everyone who was involved in subverting the will of the people in 2016, everyone who was involved in the obstruction of justice is brought to justice. Let's make sure that when you cast that ballot, it's going to go to the intended recipient. We will either have paper ballots or paper receipts for every single ballot cast, and we will be able to audit every single election that takes place in this country. And then these last three. One, let's make sure that we disallow the practice of gerrymandering by which members of Congress choose their own voters. Since the American Commission, you decide your districts. Two, let's make sure that we end the perpetual re-election of members of Congress. Term limits for everybody serving in the United States Senate, the United States House of Representatives, and term limits for the Supreme Court as well, so there's some regular term limits for their justices. And then lastly, let's make sure that we get this democracy working again by focusing on people, so no more political action committees donating to members of Congress, purchasing their allegiance, their loyalty, sometimes their silence, and their complicity. I want every single member of Congress, every candidate for that institution, to be focused squarely on you in meetings like these. Getting big money out of our politics, along with all of those other reforms, ensures that this democracy is up to this challenge at this historic moment. That's why I'm running to serve you as President of the United States of America. Should you have a question, a comment, a suggestion, an idea, some guidance from me, Cynthia will bring you a microphone and we'll get as many voices into the conversation as we can. Sir.
Yes. In order to provide a stable foundation for an emerging U.S. energy sector, do you support a long-term extension of the biodiesel and cellulosic ethanol tax credits?
Yes. I gotta tell you, when we're talking about liberating ourselves from a dependence on fossil fuels, we couldn't do much better than to look at Iowa. Both in the fact that I think you generate as much wind as a share of your energy portfolio as any other state, maybe Kansas slightly ahead, but also the fact that you, through ethanol and biofuels, have freed yourselves and your farmers from a dependence on commodity markets over which they had no control, creating value here at home, high skill, high wage, high paying jobs, and then also making sure that we've taken about 10% of gasoline off the market to replace it with something that we grow right here in America. I think if that is complemented with wind and solar and other true renewable energy resources, and then we invest in the innovation necessary to bring the next generation of products to market that will store that energy and distribute it back onto the grid even when the wind is not blowing and the sun is not shining, then this country, not China, will lead the rest of the world as we transition our economies, and we will be the primary beneficiary. Thanks for the question.
My name is Amber. I'm an ACLU Rights for All voter. In Vermont and Maine and Puerto Rico, voting is such a basic right that even when folks are incarcerated, they don't lose it. Do you commit to ensuring that the rest of the country follow the example of Vermont, Maine, and Puerto Rico?
Thank you for being here, and you're one of these courageous souls that brought your young child here as well. You get right at the heart of our plan to ensure that this democracy is up to the challenge. We want to bring 50 million more Americans into our democracy over the next 4 years through automatic and same-day voter registration. 4 million more who have spent time in our criminal justice system and have been denied the ability to participate in our elections. Once we do that and we increase voter participation, then our Congress, the White House, our institutions will truly reflect those priorities that we have here in this room. In terms of those who are incarcerated, I want to make sure that we acknowledge the fact that we have 2.3 million people behind bars right now as we enjoy one another's company and our freedom and our ability to participate in our democracy. It's the largest prison population on the face of the planet, and it is disproportionately comprised of people of color. Many there for a nonviolent drug crime, including possession of marijuana, a substance that is legal or decriminalized or medicinalized in the majority states in the Union. So a couple of things. Let's end the war on drugs.
Yes.
Let's end the prohibition on marijuana. Let's extend the arrest records for anyone caught in possession of a substance like that so that we vastly reduce that prison population and get more folks fully productive on the outside with their families, able to vote and fully participate in our democracy. So thank you for asking the question. Appreciate it.
I'm just wondering how DC is going to get things done. Right now, I see the biggest problem is everybody has really good ideas, you yourself included, but nobody can get any of this done. What good does any of it do if nobody's going to sit down and work together? How are you going to get Washington to work with you if you're a president?
Bill mentioned at the outset in the introduction that I'd spent 6 years in Congress. Every single day of those 6 years, I was in the minority. But I still had to find a way to deliver for my constituents because, as Bill also mentioned, we had an all-comers welcomed, no holds barred town hall every single month. Anyone could come, ask any question, level any criticism my way, and I certainly received them. And there was a healthy dose of fear that I felt when I went in to face my constituents. Those who put me in this place of public trust, those to whom I was accountable. And I remember at one of these town halls, someone stood up and said, Beto, we made great progress in turning around the VA in El Paso. It was the worst in the country in addressing mental health care wait times. And we made it a focus, we turned it around, we hired up, we got more veterans in for more appointments, and in the process saved more lives. But this guy says, I bet you don't know this, but those veterans who come back from combat and service with something known as an other than honorable discharge are precluded by law from setting foot in the VA. And while we have a frighteningly high suicide rate amongst veterans today, the conservative estimate is 20 a day, every day, take their own lives. The rate amongst those veterans with an other than honorable discharge who couldn't go into the VA is twice as high. What are you going to do about it? So we wrote a bill, the Honor Our Commitment Act, to make sure that those veterans can get the mental health care that they need, that I think we all agree that they deserve. But in the minority, I could write the best bill on the planet, unless I could find Republican colleagues with whom to work, it was going absolutely nowhere. So we sat down with a Republican colleague who had his own ideas about how to address this issue, compromised, dirty word right now, I know, perhaps even in the Democratic primary, certainly in Washington, D.C., but compromised to get to a consensus proposal. And then we made our case to our colleagues on the floor of the House. Mike Kaufman said, is it going to be more expensive to provide more care to these veterans? Absolutely. But we should pay any price for those who put their lives on the line for this country. And when it was my turn to talk, I said, look, there's got to be a consequence for the status of your discharge. That consequence cannot be your very life. And that's what's taking place today. We were able to get that passed 435-0 in the House, got it passed in the Senate as well, signed into law by the one person with whom I agree on almost nothing, Donald Trump. But we found enough common ground on this issue. And not only was that the approach to extend more mental health care to more veterans and save more lives, we protected public lands by working with this administration. We worked with Democrats and Republicans alike. That's what we're going to have to do, and it's the way that I'm running this campaign. I will denigrate no one, write nobody off. I could care less who you voted for in the last election. I only want us fiercely focused on the future and what we are going to do for this country and for our kids and the generations that follow. I'm confident, and we saw this in Texas. When you include everyone, you are absolutely unstoppable. At the end of the day, though we were 2.6% down to Ted Cruz, we had won more votes than any Democrat in the history of the state of Texas, won independents for the first time in decades, and 500,000 Republicans voted for a Republican governor and voted for me on the same ballot, and we in no way had to compromise our values. It was a proud, bold, progressive agenda. It's just that we brought it to every single one of those 254 counties. As president, I will do the same thing. I will make sure that we do not just make pronouncements from the White House. We don't satisfy ourselves by being right on the issues. We go throughout this country, to the red places and the blue places as well, and bring people in, force the public pressure, formed of the public will, to make sure that their representatives join us in these fights that this country is all about right now. Thanks for the question.
Once again, thank you for attending here in Clinton, Iowa, our little community in Mississippi. I'm really disheartened by the way that our current president has pulled us out of not only the climate change agreements, but also the free trade agreements, and throughout the world, in which we have become a disgrace. What are your plans when we elect you president to change that?
Not even a week ago, we got to celebrate the 75th anniversary of D-Day. And the extent and the scale of that sacrifice is almost hard for us to appreciate this many decades and generations later. That young men from this community willingly boarded ships that would take them across the Atlantic. In Portsmouth, board transports that would take them across the channel, knowing full well that many of them would never survive their service and pay the ultimate price and sacrifice for this country, and not just for this country, but for the Western democracies in this world. They made us safe and free, protected our liberties, but they did so for our allies as well. And out of that war and that sacrifice was forged the alliances that perhaps we take for granted today, and certainly our president does. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization, whose Common Defense Clause has only been invoked once, and that was when we were attacked on 9/11. And all the other partner countries came to our defense and went into war with us in Afghanistan almost 18 years ago. And this president calls into question whether NATO makes any sense anymore for this country. Our trade alliances in the European Union, our biggest trading partner in Mexico, our friend Canada, he's turned his backs on them as he takes us into a trade war in China. And as your former governor, Tom Vilsack, said, when in the history of this country have we ever gone into war without allies or friends? And that's exactly what this president has done, causing the farmer here in Iowa to pay the full price of that war that I see no victory for and no end in sight today. And then at this moment that there's an open question around the world, is the future an autocratic one or a democratic one? Our president is signaling with the strongmen and the dictators, Vladimir Putin, al-Sisi in Egypt, Erdogan in Turkey. And instead of embracing our democratic allies and friends, he's telling the world that it is okay to violate the human rights of your citizens. It's okay to bomb your neighbors, as Saudi Arabia is doing to Yemen, into the last century. It's okay because you will not face any consequences from the United States of America. I want to make sure that we re-engage with the world and earn the world's respect again. Sign back up to the Paris Climate Accord. We're the one country who's accepted ourselves so far. And then lastly, in terms of a foreign policy opportunity, the fact that these kids have to travel these 2,000 miles to come to this country, that no wall is going to keep them out. What if we decided that we would work with the communities in the Northern Triangle, Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador, work with other partner countries, including Mexico, to reduce violence at home, enlist the aid of farmers here in Iowa to help those farmers who are struggling with the yields that they're seeing in Guatemala, put American expertise and know-how to work so that fewer people have to leave in the first place and make that journey. That's the way that I want this country to distinguish ourselves on the national stage. Thank you.
I'm so sad about the guns in the schools, kids getting shot, at the workplace. What are you going to do about that?
I'm saddened by it as well. Amy and I were saddened when last spring our youngest, Henry, was coming home from first grade, and we asked him what he had done at school, and he was so excited because he didn't know that this is not normal and not right, to tell us about the active shooter drill that his teacher conducted. And I think about the fact that in Texas, chances are she's working a second or a third job because we do not respect or pay our teachers commensurate with the value that they provide. She is laboring under these standardized, high-stakes, high-pressure tests that in no way effectively measure her performance or the child's potential before her. Very often, out of her own pocket, she's not only paying for the decorations in the classroom or the school supplies for the kid who forgot them, but the warm meal for the kid who's on free and reduced breakfast and lunch but has no dinner to go home to. Now we're asking that teacher to put herself between that kid for whom she's already sacrificed so much and an active shooter who walks in the door because we have failed to form the political will to implement universal background checks, which have reduced gun violence by 50% in most communities and states in the hospital. Because we're scared of the NRA and the gun lobby, and we will not stop the sales of weapons of war and assault rifles into our communities where they are turned around and used against us in our schools, in our mosques, in our synagogues, in our churches, in our public life. And because we won't adopt red flag laws that simply state that if you are a danger to yourself or to someone else in your life or in my life, we are going to stop you before it is too late. We respect and we will defend the Second Amendment, but we will not do so at the price of the lives of our fellow Americans. Those are the steps that we need to take. Thank you for
asking. I'm not sure I need the microphone, but
We can hear you loud and clear.
thank you very much for coming to our community. Very much appreciated. I rise to address an issue that's not getting any public attention, and it's of crucial importance to anyone who lives, works, or commutes near our nation's railroad right-of-ways. 1 a.m. June 2013, a 74-car unattended tank train loaded with bacon crude oil careened down a 1.2% grade in the town of Lac-Mégantic, Canada, at a speed that caused it to derail on a curve in the center of town where the cars ruptured and exploded, incinerating 47 unsuspecting souls at a local watering hole. In March 2016, the U.S. Federal Railroad Administration published a notice of proposed rulemaking in the Federal Register requiring 2 men on all U.S. trains and inviting public comment. Over 1,600 public comments were received. In the absence of federal action, concerned state legislators continued passing state two-man laws. With a change in administration in Washington, the FRA in May 2019 withdrew their notice of proposed rulemaking requiring two-man crews, and remarkably preempted states from making or enforcing their own laws in the absence of other federal action. States are expected to sue. Too many governmental watchdogs charged with regulating corporate industry become political lapdogs for the very industries they are charged with regulating. What will you do to assure this practice stops?
Yeah. Thank you for being here. This is why we hold town hall meetings. It's rare that this issue comes up. In fact, I've held about 170 different town hall meetings over the last 3 months, and I believe this is the first time it has come up. And so not only are you making me smarter on this issue, but everyone who's listening and watching understands the consequences of current policy and practice, and the fact that you're right, our institutions, including our regulators, are corrupted and captured by special interests, corporations, and those who can purchase the policy that we see, even when it is at odds with the public health and our safety. So yes, I support staffing those crews so that we have safety both for those who are on those trains and for the communities through which those trains pass. And I'll just note that your colleagues in El Paso, Texas, another great rail and train town, have been very vocal on this. And so when I was a member of Congress, this came up a lot. I was actually a co-sponsor on federal legislation to do exactly what you just described. But when you describe the disconnect between what's good for us and what we're actually doing, between the fact that you and I, as federal taxpayers, pay for the investment in the innovation and research to come up with medications and cures that are sold back to us at the highest rates on the face of the planet, and that we will not allow Medicare to use its leverage and purchasing power to bring down the costs of those medications, that we allow internet service providers to sell your private web browsing data without your consent or your permission. If you follow the money, those who should be regulated, in this case the railroad industry, able to buy their bottom line over our safety, you understand why getting our democracy back and repairing this and getting PACs completely out of the equation is so essential. So you've got my support on the policy, but perhaps most importantly, you've got my support to fix the democracy so that we can actually implement this and get this to work. Thank you for being here.
I wasn't able to get to you, but this is going to be our last question.
Hi, my name is Tony. It's been 160 years since slavery was abolished. It's been 60 years since Civil Rights Act has been passed. Yet African Americans, as well as other minorities, are experiencing racism in America today, whether that's through police brutality or the unfair justice system. What are you going to do as president to fix racism in America today?
Great question. I'll just add some things that I've learned since I've been in Iowa. African Americans constitute 3% of the population in this state. They comprise 26% of the prison population of this state. I mentioned these nonviolent drug offenses. We know that Americans across race and ethnicity and country of national origin use illegal drugs at roughly the same rate. But only some are more likely than others to be stopped, to be frisked, to be arrested, to be imprisoned, to, upon release, be forced to check a box on every employment application form saying that you have a conviction, meaning that you're not going to get that job, or it's a lot less likely that you will no longer qualify for federal student loans to improve yourself through higher education so that you can give more back to yourself and your family, your community, and your country, are locked into more narrowed options and constrained outcomes. And we're doing this at a greater rate than any other country on the planet today. But what I've also learned by listening to people is this is not restricted to the criminal justice system. There is 10 times the wealth in white America than there is in black America. It's not an accident. Though the wealth of this country originally was built by black America, those who were kidnapped from West Africa, brought here in bondage, as slaves built up this country literally. Those generations succeeded them have been in no material way been able to enjoy the success that they helped to create. Now, whether it's redlining or Jim Crow or segregation or the ramifications of slavery that are alive and well in 2019, in a kindergarten classroom, a black child is 5 times as likely to be disciplined or suspended or expelled as a white kid. So that prison population, that schoolhouse to jailhouse pipeline, that doesn't begin in high school. It begins when a kid is defenseless at 4 or 5 years old. Healthcare, the maternal mortality crisis that we have in this country, that is claiming the lives of women as we have an attack on women's rights to make their own decisions about their own bodies. It's 3 times as deadly for women of color in this country. And so I just want to add to you the urgency, add to what you just said, the urgency of this issue and squarely confronting it. You ask, what will I do as president? I'll do everything that I can, including acknowledging with the humility that no one person will be able to face this challenge alone. It will really require this country coming together and really being willing to tell our true, full American story. When we talk about race, it's not just Martin Luther King Jr. or John Lewis crossing the Edmund Pettus Bridge or the integration of lunch counters in North Carolina. It is also the lynchings, the brutality, the criminal gangs or the work gangs, African Americans arrested solely for their ability to contribute labor. And if we're going to get to reparation, fundamental to that word is repair. And repair will necessitate the truth and the facts being shared widely with every single American, regardless of your race or your ethnicity, how many generations you've been in this country, or whether you just got here yesterday. I will make sure that I do everything in my power as president to guarantee that this country has that conversation, and that we then take the policies and practices that follow to begin the work of repair, and certainly to stop visiting these kinds of injustices on future generations going forward. Thanks for asking the question. Really appreciate it. So, I want to thank George again for hosting us here today. To each of you for taking some time to be with us. Cynthia has said we've got a little bit of time before our next meeting, and so if you would like to say hello, take a picture, I'd love the chance to shake your hand.
Great.
We'll be right out here, and Amy will join us as well, right? Yeah.
Right.
Thank you all very much for having us out. Gracias. Thank you.